The air, water, earth, and sun awes us. The four awesome forces of nature can provide 1,000 times more energy than we need. You are also awesome. You and me and all Earthkind are the fifth element. We are literally changing the world. Technology is now harnessing nature's awesome power for electricity, heat, and transportation. And the best news is that the clean energy transition can save us money and create a more prosperous, just, beautiful, and sustainable civilization today. Welcome to the Awesome Earthkind podcast. If you would please share who you are, where do you live, and what kind of work do you do?
Good morning, Ron. My name is Tom Herman, and I live in New Canaan, Connecticut, but I've just moved here from Singapore, where I've spent the last couple of years. I'm an entrepreneur and a mountaineer and a software architect and a dad, an experiential educator. Gosh, so many tags that I could take. But that's the high level.
Outstanding. And we like to start with, we call them a quantum quote, but an inspirational quote that kind of inspires people to think about things a little bit differently. Would you have one you'd care to share, sir?
Sure. I'm actually going to give you two. One is from my work as an entrepreneur, and neither of these are my own quotes, but make the journey the reward. As an entrepreneur, most startups fail. And so I like to suggest both to myself and the entrepreneurs that I work with to make sure that you enjoy the process of building a company and being an entrepreneur, because the end payout, if you're looking to make money, is unlikely to be there. I personally love building companies, building teams, building products. So I get a lot of satisfaction from the journey in and of itself. And then the other that I'm going to share is a quote from my mom, who had many great quotes for me. I don't know where this one came from, but she said, if you're going to do something anyway, you might as well do it with a smile. I did mention that I'm a dad, so I use that pretty often because sometimes my kids don't really want to do some of the things that they need to do, even though they're going to do it. So it's a win-win if you're going to do it anyway.
Do it with a smile. There we go.
So,
how old are your kids?
My kids are 4, 10, 12, and 26.
Wow, quite the spread. Oh my gosh. Well, good luck to you. And great quote from your mom. Mine's similar, but it was more, if you're going to do something, do it right or don't do it at all. So it was always a way to live, So
Yep.
But I like it with a smile even better. All right. So tell us about carbon offsets. What are they? How do they work? And what? So first, why are you involved with this? And then what are these carbon offsets, and how do you see this whole thing working?
So I learned about carbon offsets through Bill Pazos and Thomas MacMahon, who are the founders of AirCarbon. And I learned about it when I started living in Singapore. I'd moved there for my wife's job, and so spent a little bit of time looking around at opportunities and ended up getting excited about AirCarbon. AirCarbon is a marketplace for carbon offsets that are in the form of fungible blockchain tokens. The carbon markets today are pretty fragmented, opaque, and disorganized. So AirCarbon is using blockchain technology to bring transparency and liquidity to the market. And maybe I should even tell you a little bit about what carbon offsets are. So
yes, please.
Carbon offsets are a mechanism for basically counting the carbon emissions that you're either producing or sequestering. So when a carbon project, like a forestry project or a methane capture project that's capturing methane from a pig farm or from a landfill project, is able to reduce or capture the carbon that would otherwise be released into the atmosphere through an international registry process, they can earn a carbon credit for that, which they can then sell to a company that has a carbon footprint or an individual that has a carbon footprint, which would like to offset their footprint. An example being Delta Airlines, when you fly, they can't reduce the carbon emissions to zero. So as a second best choice, they can help you to offset it by capturing carbon somewhere else, by planting a tree or doing some other activity.
So the basic idea on carbon offsets is that first for yourself, reduce the amount of carbon, do efficiency, get renewables, do all those clean energy aspects as much as you can. But at the end of the day, most of us are still going to have other aspects of our lives that we just can't reduce the carbon from, whether we're flying on an airplane or whatever else. So when we do that, purchase a carbon offset so it takes that amount of carbon out of the environment, and that's what the offset does. Is that got it?
That's correct. Yep.
And then by purchasing those offsets, you're helping to support projects that do that. And you have a particular focus on carbon offsets and where the money flows kind of are and where they should be, right?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting concept. At some level, I see carbon offsets as a means of transferring wealth from the industrial north, which has benefited economically over the last few centuries from emitting carbon, and transferring that wealth to the global south, which is now paying the price of environmental change. There's an opportunity for a win-win-win here. If we can send money to carbon capture projects in Indonesia, Africa, Latin America, and other places that will help address climate change by capturing carbon while at the same time providing food, better living standards, education, and so forth. This will also help address some of the sustainable development goals at the same time, and allow people who have benefited from causing climate change to support those who are really bearing the brunt of the damage caused by climate change. So that's another way to see it. I frequently have people say, oh, carbon offsets are just an excuse to continue to emit carbon. And I don't agree with that. I think we need an all of the above strategy to addressing climate change. That means every company, every individual needs to work to the best of their ability to reduce their carbon footprint. But we also need to be realistic and know that it's going to take decades to reduce carbon emissions based on how society works today, to reduce them to zero. And so we need to find other mechanisms to help reduce climate change by offsetting in places where it's easier or quicker to do. And if we can do that and it benefits the community that is sequestering carbon while also transferring wealth from the north, where we've benefited from so many years of carbon emissions, I think it's a great opportunity.
So the trends that are kind of driving this, it seems like there's twofold. One, there's the voluntary, and you could mention a couple of companies maybe that are doing it voluntarily, that want to offset. And then there's also the regulatory. If we could talk about that, and what does that look like, and how do you see that pushing things along?
Sure. Well, there's a multi-billion-dollar marketplace in voluntary carbon offsets. This is for companies that choose to offset their carbon emissions either because they care about the environment or because their customers do, or potentially their investors do. And they can offset in any way they wish, but there's an entire structure set up by the UN to ensure that those carbon offsets that they purchase are as high quality as possible. And then the other part of the market, which is hundreds of billions of dollars, is the compliance market, which is based on regulatory requirements to reduce carbon emissions and offset carbon emissions associated with the most high intensity carbon activities we participate in, which are things like the production of cement, the production of steel, the production of energy, and now to some degree, transportation, with new regulations for international flights to reduce carbon emissions.
So some of the companies that are leading the way with carbon offsets, do I understand? I heard that Google was looking to purchase like all their historical carbon output. Is that an example, or?
Actually, that's Microsoft. Google is also very interested in this, and a lot of high-tech companies have the money to address these. There are so many companies now that have pledged to be carbon neutral, either immediately or by 2030 or by 2050, and countries as well. But if you're talking about companies that are really setting standards and leading the way, I think Microsoft is a really exciting one to consider. They've invested a tremendous amount in the voluntary carbon markets to ensure that they're buying offsets that are highly durable, and that they're also supporting the long-term sustainability of this market for themselves and for others. So they buy lots of different carbon offsets. They support carbon removal projects, and they are involved with a lot of the standard setting bodies to ensure that the markets have transparency and that you can tell when you purchase what are high quality. They've invested in a big team whose job is to evaluate carbon offsets and to also work on reducing their own carbon footprint. And like you said, Microsoft has committed to not only being carbon neutral, but to being carbon negative to the point where they will remove carbon from the atmosphere in excess of the total carbon that they've emitted since the company was founded. And that's pretty exciting and cool. There's very few companies that could pledge to do that.
Yeah, very outstanding. So their whole historical usage, it's amazing. So you had mentioned at one point about some of the challenges with the regulatory environment and how different localities are setting things up and how that may or may not be really the right strategy. So do you want to talk about the regulatory piece of this and how you see things currently and where you think they need to go?
Sure. So a couple things. First, I would just say that, it's my view that climate change is already a runaway process and there's no stopping it. Weather will get more extreme, as we see already, for the next 50 years. As it does, carbon capture and carbon removal by both natural and industrial carbon removal processes will probably become the largest activity mankind has ever engaged in after food, energy, and I suppose procreation. But those are sort of huge activities of humanity. But removing 300 years worth of carbon emissions from the atmosphere is going to take many decades. And in the interim, we're going to see sea level rise, more storms, more weird polar vortexes and stuff like we saw in Texas this year. The most vulnerable populations in the world will bear the brunt of the deleterious effects of climate change, and those least able to handle the change and with the fewest resources to handle it are going to have to deal with it. So given that these people are mostly in the global south, although they're also across the United States and other developed countries, we need to make sure that the carbon markets and that the regulatory process recognizes this. Today, if you are in Canada and you're working under the Quebec cap and trade or the output-based pricing regulations in Canada, or if you're within the California cap and trade or the New England RGGI markets, all of the carbon offsets that you're allowed to purchase to compensate for your emissions in producing energy, transportation, et cetera, need to come from North America, in particular from Canada or the United States. And in the case of California cap and trade, most of them need to come from California. And I understand the regulatory reasons for doing that. California doesn't want too much of the money that it is investing in buying carbon offsets to be sent out of the state or out of the country. And I get that. It's important. They want to invest in making sure that California is reducing carbon emissions. But I think it's important for us to remember, as I said earlier, that the global south is bearing the vast majority of the brunt of the effects of climate change. And some portion of the regulatory environment or the regulatory requirements should allow us to transfer money, to pay money to communities in the developing world that need these resources in order to clean their water and restore their environment as well. So I really want to see carbon offsets not only as a means of adding cost, real cost to industrial process in the developed world, but also as a means of supporting the needs of the developing world to deal with this carnage that we've created over the last several hundred years of climate change.
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, the carbon offset market is growing, right? But there's some challenges with it that specifically you guys are looking to solve, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Well, I think I think the interesting thing that's happening with the market, or the challenge with the market, is that it's very opaque. There's not a lot of transparency about who's taking money out of the market, where the carbon offsets are coming from, and who's verified that they're real. You may purchase carbon offsets in your shopping cart as you check out with some Amazon vendor or on some website, and they say, "Oh, you know, your sneakers have a carbon output of 3 kilograms, and you can buy 3 kilograms of carbon offset as you check out here for $1." And then the question is, what happens to that dollar? And today, a lot of the opportunities for consumers to buy carbon offsets, only anywhere from 30 to 70% of the money you spend actually goes to the carbon projects and is invested in sequestering carbon or improving the environment in the area where the carbon project is happening. And the other, up to 70%, is being taken by middlemen, carbon brokers, and there might be 2 or 3 carbon brokers in any one transaction. But carbon brokers are marking up carbon offsets by 20, 30, 40%. Sometimes 20% per side on a transaction. They charge 20% of the buyer and of the seller. So AirCarbon is looking to add transparency and also make it possible for you to track the carbon offsets to where they came from. You can see through use of blockchain technology exactly what the carbon project was, what the vintage, the year that the carbon that you're paying for was sequestered, and you can see all the verification data from the registries and the auditors and the verifiers. And in addition, because AirCarbon charges 1% commissions, we connect buyers directly with sellers. We're dramatically increasing transparency and reducing costs and ensuring that more of the money that is spent on carbon offsets goes to the projects that are actually reducing carbon emissions.
Fantastic. So basically, yeah, you're a trading piece that just cuts out a lot of the middle work and actually gets the dollars where they're supposed to be, which is in doing products. That's great. So how fast have you guys grown? How long has it been going on? How fast, where are you guys at? Where do you see the market going?
So the market is growing incredibly quickly. AirCarbon is almost 2 years old now, and we launched just at the beginning of this year, 2021. And we've seen transaction growth increase pretty steadily. We have dozens and dozens of new customers going through our KYC process because we're trading carbon as an asset class. The know your customer and anti-money laundering requirements associated with doing business in Singapore are pretty substantial. And because the dollar values of these commodities are in the many millions of dollars, we have a strict process of onboarding, and we're a B2B company. But it's growing quickly, and I think there's some really interesting trends in what's driving the market these days.
And those trends, if you want to elicit these?
So I think one of the most interesting changes is the tremendous demand for carbon removals. Initially, a lot of carbon offsets were from reducing carbon emissions, so changing from a coal-fired power plant to a natural gas power plant, or from natural gas to wind and solar. But now we're actually seeing demand for carbon removal, not just reducing emissions. And so forestry projects are probably the most compelling right now in this regard, because planting and protecting trees and peatland and mangroves and grassland is something that we know how to do at scale, and it's very effective at sequestering carbon, if not especially durable, which is to say forest fires can cause a large carbon sequestration project in the form of a forest to emit all the carbon. So when a company like Microsoft looks at forestry projects, they understand that it's not going to be as guaranteed a carbon sink as, for example, embedding carbon in cement and concrete, or putting it 10,000 feet underground, which might have a duration of thousands of years. Also, we have excellent technology available for measuring and verifying the carbon biomass stored in forestry projects. But I think personally, storing carbon in the soil through agricultural processes is probably the biggest near-term opportunity for humanity. Humans eat a lot, and so we farm a lot, and our current mechanized farming process is extremely chemically dependent, and fertilizer and tilling is central to our large-scale agriculture. New regenerative farming techniques are much more productive. They produce more nutritious foods and are less destructive to the earth, but they also sequester millions of tons of carbon in the soil in a very long-term, durable way. They're not vulnerable to forest fires. And I would basically say, if you haven't watched Woody Harrelson's Kiss the Ground movie, a documentary on Netflix, I recommend that you do. It's great, and it'll really teach you a lot about the agricultural system in the United States and around the world, and how it can change to be more profitable for farmers and better for the environment. So, we're now developing things like active radar-based satellite measurement systems can measure not only forest biomass, but also soil carbon biomass. And this is a truly massive near-term opportunity to protect the planet and address climate change in a way that's great for big business and can feed humanity.
Yeah, amazing. In earlier this year, in the spring, we did an interview with Nicole Lederer of the Environmental Entrepreneurs. She was a co-founder and she's a chair. And one of their main focus now, the Environmental Entrepreneurs, are 10,000 entrepreneurs across the country that are focusing on policies that are good for the environment and good for the economy, because they do go hand in hand. And one of the big pieces is regenerative agriculture, because that really seems to be the biggest place where we can use everything that we do for all our food processing, and instead of having it be chemical and carbon intensive, we can reverse that process, support the farmers, and simultaneously take that carbon out of the air and put it into the soil, which would be a wonderful thing. So so you're lots going on. I agree with you, and it seems like that's a fast growing trend, regenerative agriculture. Thanks, Steve.
That's growing, but not fast enough growing. The more we learn about it, the more I think people are going to demand it in their foodstuffs.
Yeah, I do agree with you. There's a lot of opportunity, tremendous amount of opportunity there, and you're absolutely right. So wonderful. All right. So as you've been doing this, Tom, what sort of challenges have you encountered? What lessons have you learned, and what are you doing differently now than you thought you would be doing?
Well, for me, the next steps, I mentioned that AirCarbon is based in Singapore. So for me, the next step is building out AirCarbon's customer base in North America. So I'm looking for buyers and sellers of carbon offsets, both compliance and voluntary. And I'm focused on interesting things like soil carbon, although methane capture is also a big opportunity. And I've also been fascinated by some of the cool direct air carbon capture. We're partnering with shipping and logistics companies, energy producers, transportation providers. We've been attaching carbon offsets to LNG contracts, so a buyer can purchase a natural gas contract that's already been offset for the shipping, for the carbon emitted during shipping and the carbon emitted during the gas compression phase of producing LNG. We can attach carbon offsets to mining operations and other commodity shipments. I've been really surprised at the number of opportunities and the interest in various industries in looking at their supply chains and looking at opportunities to offset. So that's been a surprise. I'm going to continue to do that in the United States. And outside of AirCarbon, I'm also working on a B2B2C product. This is a product that will allow companies to engage their customers in the process of managing their carbon footprints. It is somewhat educational and It's based on collectible NFTs. I'd love to talk about it more in detail in a future conversation. It's a little bit in stealth mode right now. But if anyone listening is interested in how the NFT craze today can help companies engage their customers in offsetting carbon emissions and addressing their carbon footprint, I'd love to talk to you. So, feel free to reach out. But it surprised me how pervasive carbon footprint has become across every industry.
So NFT being a non-fungible token, is that
non-fungible tokens? Yes.
There we go. Right.
This recent crazy investment craze that's included stuff like the NBA's Top Shots and the recent sale of a $69 million collage by Beeple and the sale of the first tweet for like $600,000 and all kinds of crazy stuff happening in the NFT market, collectibles and so forth these days, which is a fascinating bubble to watch.
Yeah, definitely. No doubt about it. And it's already starting to collapse a bit. So we'll see how it all goes, but it is totally crazy. The worst one I heard was this group of guys that collected their gaseous excretions for a year and then did an NFT on it. Actually made some money doing it, but they did it as a farce. But believe it or not, it was crazy times. But okay, well, different conversation for another day. All right, let's go on. So if you could, we call them a supernova, value supernova, a unique tip, tool, or tactic that you think most people need to know, but don't.
A tip, tool, or tactic?
Yeah, something that you've done that, people should just recognize,
Something that I've done. Okay. Well, I mean, I would say that the number one thing is a lot of people are interested in carbon offsets and offsetting their carbon footprint and reducing their carbon footprint. So the thing that I would say is, if you're buying carbon offsets, make sure to understand how much of the money you spend actually goes to the project that's developing the carbon offset.
Great. That's a wonderful, great pick. All right. A lot of our careers, most of us have gone through kind of a down moment at some point in time where we learned something the hard way, and that learning worst moment in some ways shifted our perspective in life, and then we went in a different direction. Do you care to share your moment there, sir?
Well, you mentioned that we might talk about this. I've been thinking about it a little bit, and I'm not sure how to answer it properly. But what I would say is, I've spent most of my life traveling the world. I've lived in various countries: Singapore, Indonesia, France, Jamaica, Colombia, etc. And I've traveled to dozens of other countries, setting up an international television network and so forth. So I now know that the carbon consequence of all this travel is really substantial. And so I need to rethink how I travel, where I travel. And this is a sad reality for me, but it's also important. And so we should all think about that as we gear up for, spring break in the Bahamas or wherever it is that we're going. Are there ways to live that require less air travel?
Okay. A particular aha moment where you were working on something and all of a sudden you got it, and it took you someplace interesting. So if you would, tell us the story.
Sure. Really simple is, I was reading this morning about a company called Planetary Hydrogen that makes hydrogen gas as an energy source, kind of like natural gas, but they're making it through a really cool process that uses renewable energy. One thing that I would mention is that our solar and wind power production is not well matched to our energy demands, which is to say, the sun only shines during the day, but we have a lot of need for electricity at night, and the wind blows sometimes, and so often we have natural energy production from, I should say renewable energy production that isn't being used because it's in excess when the grid demand is low, and sometimes it's low when the grid demand is high. So we can use this excess energy to actually produce hydrogen gas. And this company that I was mentioning, Planetary Hydrogen, does that in a way that addresses ocean health and captures carbon and basically puts it into the equivalent of seashells, which is what the ocean naturally does. When it aggregates carbon and puts it into seashells and other compounds that will last for a long time. So planetary hydrogen, ways to make energy that are good for the environment.
Fascinating. Sounds great. All right. We're going to enter the Pulsar round, where we're going to ask you a series of questions, and we look for your short, succinct, amazing, and mind-blowing answers. Are you ready, sir?
I'm ready.
There we go. All right. So what's the best advice you've ever received, Tom?
So I have to repeat myself. The best advice I've ever received is, if you're going to do it anyway, do it with a smile. I come up with this time and time again. I'm like a broken record.
Thanks, Mom. All right. One of your personal habits that contributes to your success, sir.
So two things I would say: reading voraciously, although not books, mostly trade journals and articles, and running. I find getting exercise and reading are two things that really help me. Some people would say that my running is really the equivalent of meditation. And mindful meditation is important. And so my mindful meditation is running.
Outstanding. Is there an internet resource that you'd care to share that folks should take a look at?
An internet resource. I don't know. I'm going to have to pass. Okay. It's a lightning round. So
we'll pass on that. We'll pass on that one. All right, good. A book you'd recommend to people?
Okay. So a book I'd recommend is The New Map by Daniel Yergin. It's about energy and global politics associated with energy, and covers the history up to present of energy politics, and it's fascinating.
Wonderful. All right. If you had a magic wand and you could change it and make change for everybody in the world, what would it be?
Well, so I'm going to say something like faster than light travel.
Faster than light travel. That's your magic wand and wish, huh? And you can go anywhere? Teleport.
Well, so, I think there's probably a lot of other planets around the world. And so I don't have a lot of faith in our ability to change what we're doing here. So maybe we need to go start again on another planet.
Oh man, that's a longer conversation for another day.
That's a longer conversation. I'm a sci-fi fan, so
I'm a sci-fi fan as well.
Faster than light travel.
FTL. There we go, baby. We'll have that conversation another time. All right. So we call this section Weather Time, WTF or F, Weather Time Fudge, an extreme weather event that you lived through and tell the tale, or Weather Time Fun, the most fun you've ever had and the type of weather it was.
Okay. Well, this one, I would say, I've been in a number of interesting weather phenomenon, but maybe the most fun was most interesting was on a sailboat, off the coast of Colombia. And it was supposed to be a day trip, and we weren't really, provisioned for overnight. And we ended up having to anchor in a mangrove, forest, near a relatively isolated island, and sleep overnight, and wait for the weather to clear. And so sleeping out in the hot equatorial rain in a mangrove forest on a sailboat due to a storm without the proper gear to do so was interesting.
Yeah, the weather itself is always fascinating, but nowadays, with the increased amount of carbon and greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and the massive wild shifts in weather with extreme weather events, with flooding and droughts and hurricanes and tornadoes and all sorts of nasty things. So yep. Thank you.
And of course, I went through Superstorm Sandy, but I was up in a high elevation in Manhattan, and so it didn't really impact me that much.
Not as bad as it could have been, that's for sure. But they're still recovering from Sandy all along various different places. So it's pretty amazing. All right. What's the one thing you're most energized about today, Tom?
I am most energized by the increasing pace of change. I find it so exciting and so energizing to see how many new technologies and how many new ideas are coming up and being spread far and wide over the internet around the world every day. So pace of change is overwhelming, and for me, energizing and exciting. And I'm sure it's going to get us to FTL real soon.
Yeah, there's a book that one of the guests had said that was really fascinating, which is The Future is Faster Than You Think. And it
That's
talks
right.
specifically about all these convergent technologies, everything from clean energy and battery storage and artificial intelligence and all the various things going on and how they're all converging, and all this impact with computers, etc. So, yeah,
Okay, I'm gonna jump backwards to your magic wand question, because I have two other magic wand answers that I think are more appropriate and less
Go ahead.
The first one would be a super high density, low weight battery solution that is not environmentally damaging to produce. I think one of the most important things that we need today, that I see the world working feverishly on, is battery technology. So my magic wand would be battery technology or a miniature fusion energy production system that allowed us to produce massive amounts of energy with no environmental impact.
Back to the Future with a little fusion in the car that you can just go and massive megawatts of power. There we go. Gigawatts of power right in your hand.
In fact, that gigawatts of power, or whatever the next number larger than gigawatts is probably what we need for faster than light travel.
Yeah, no doubt. Terawatts and beyond. So, but yeah, fascinating.
Gigawatts.
Yeah, there we go. Right. Googleplex. All right. Thank you very much. All right. So grand finale, a piece of parting advice. And if you want people to get a hold of you, the best way for them to do so.
So I love working with entrepreneurs and subject matter experts to launch companies. I'd be happy to help and learn more about what your listeners are doing. The best way to reach out to me is on LinkedIn. I'm LinkedIn/in/Tom Herman. Pretty easy to find. And I'd love to talk to you about your entrepreneurship and startup adventures.
Outstanding. Thanks for joining us today, awesome people. At awesomeearthkind.com, you'll find tips and resources on how to reduce your energy costs and have a positive environmental impact. You can also enter our monthly sweepstakes for a high-efficiency LED light fixture. If you're interested in becoming an Earthkind Energy Consulting Partner, go to awesomeearthkind.com/earn. When you refer us to a commercial building and they decide to go clean and save green with Earthkind Energy's consulting services, your referral will save money and you will earn finder's fees worth thousands of dollars. If you're interested in starting your own clean energy consulting business, sign up to be notified of the Clean Energy Business Partner that we're launching in May. This intensive program will provide you with the tools you need to start your own clean energy consulting business in the fast-growing $7 trillion clean energy sector. Today's podcast was co-sponsored by New Energy Nexus. New Energy Nexus strives to create an abundant world with a 100% clean energy economy for 100% of the population in the shortest time possible. The future of clean energy is 100% for the 100%. Become part of the solution by going to newenergynexus.com. Remember, you are an awesome force of nature and can make a real difference. Take your next step to create the clean energy future we all want and our children need and deserve. Until next time, take care, be well, and energize.